So, friends, very good evening, and thanks a lot for joining this evening in a highly polluted and facing enormous traffic jams all over the city. I'm really grateful that so many of you have found time to come. We have a very esteemed panel of speakers. Mr. Sompal Shastri, who was a member of the Niti Aayog, would be joining soon. Dr. Trilochan Mahapatra was the Director General of Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Dr. Swaminathan will join virtually from Chennai. She was in WHO till recently, you may be aware. And Dr. George John was also in ICAR in the fisheries sector. Then he was Vice Chancellor in Jharkhand. And of course, our director, Mr. K. N. Srivastava. So before I request the panelists to join, I will just introduce the subject in about 5 minutes. Green revolution is a much criticized thing these days, and it is blamed for all our evils, from pollution of underground water to burning of Purali and pollution in Delhi and so many other evils. But not many people know the background of what it contributed to making India food secure. Those who are present in this room are aware of this, but still, at the cost of repetition, I will just narrate a few things. Some of these things are taken from a book which I found very fascinating, Accidental India by Shankar Iyer. It was a book not only about agriculture, but also about early days of India's independence and economic policies. So this Pan Am flight was coming from Manila, and there was a passenger on that flight which was landing on a hot summer morning, and he was carrying an overcoat which was quite incongruous at that time because he was coming from New Zealand via Manila. Now, New Zealand is in southern hemisphere, so he was carrying that coat, and he was carrying 1 kilogram of seeds of Taichung Native 1 paddy variety. So under the Livestock Importation Act 1898 and Destructive Insects and Pests Act 1914, quarantine was required. The customs officers at that time, they were more considerate perhaps, or he was an officer of the Ministry of Agriculture. So they called, after some bit of haggling, the private secretary to Minister of Agriculture. The private secretary happened to be Mr. S. Venkataramanan, who later on became the governor of Reserve Bank of India. And the passenger was Dr. Guduru Venkatachalam. The agriculture minister was Mr. C. Subramaniam. These were the seeds of a revolution which would take shape some time later, in which Dr. Swaminathan played a very important role. But this so-called not very legal import of seeds into India also had a background. And that background was not lost on our policymakers at that time. Between 1860 and 1909, India faced 22 famines. In 1897, some 3 million people were relieved of their lives, as written by a British scholar. Relieved of their lives. So I like this term. The worst famine, of course, was 1784, very bad famine. And 1/3 of arable land was out of cultivation because of famine. Then the partition came, and we got 75% of land mass, but 82% of population. Only 15% of land area was irrigated, as the irrigated areas of Punjab and Sindh went to Pakistan. Of course, today we have reached 52% of irrigated area. So that has been going up, though at a slower pace than what one would like, but it is going up. And in the initial days after independence, there were two camps. Gandhiji supporting self-restraint, sacrifice, and fasting, and Nehru a supporter of modernization of agriculture, etc., etc. Fertilizer use at that time was less than 1 kilogram per hectare. And in the initial days, as Shankar Iyer has documented in this book, the new government, Nehru government, also set up committee after committee, not very different from what happens today. So in 1947, we had Food Grains Policy Commission under Purushottam Das, Thakur Das, which said we must increase domestic production and reduce imports. In 1949, another committee, Food Grains Investigation Commission, which said invest in irrigation and improve distribution of seeds and fertilizers. Then we were in bad shape. We were import dependent. In 1951, Harry Truman, the president of US, passed the India Emergency Food Aid, which said that 2 million tons of food grains, about 2/3 of India's imports at that time, were to be provided by the US. And the planning process had started. There were a lot of disputes between Planning Commission and the government. In the second plan, Mahalanobis, otherwise a great man, he emphasized industrialization. And out of 800 crore in the plan, some 570 crores were given to agriculture and community development. I think there is some mistake in this figure. So by mid-50s, food shortages were continuing. Some of you may have experienced it. I have myself stood in food queues at ration shops, but of course, our younger generation is completely unaware. Between 1955 and 1971, India received 50 million tons of food grains under PL 480. Then Nehru appointed Ashok Mehta Committee, which recommended price incentives. Again, a very contentious idea these days, price support scheme, MSP. That committee recommended buffer stocking and a system of incentives. But the National Development Council at one point of time resolved to taking over of grain trade. Fortunately, the idea failed. Then the Ford Foundation, which is a precursor to Green Revolution, which is a subject relevant to today's discussion, it submitted a 260-page report on India's food crisis and how to improve that. So 3 things came recommended by the Ford Foundation team, which is basically credited for the policies enacted at that time: improved seeds, cheap fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, much discredited these days, credit, irrigation, technical advice, and price support. These things still continue to be the foundation of our food policies, which have made India a food-sufficient nation. Of course, there are certain problems. So in 1959, Dr. Swaminathan, then an assistant cytogenetist at IARI, met Dr. Vogel, feed breeder, who put him in touch with Norman Borlaug. After Nehru's death, the Prime Minister Shastri selected Dr. C. Subramaniam as the agriculture minister. He prepared a blueprint for import of seeds, fertilizers, extension, public infrastructure, etc. The finance minister, TTK, shot down the price support scheme. So price support has had a checkered history. And the planning commission, which was led by VKRV Rao, termed it inflationary and anti-plan. So, and I will stop there. Dr. Subramaniam, agriculture minister, told the cabinet that if the cabinet is not in a position to accept this agriculture policy based on price incentives, they should find someone else to take charge of the agriculture ministry. So this is the background of Green Revolution, in which Dr. Swaminathan played a stellar role. Since Dr. Sompal Shastri seems to be stuck up and we have audience across India, therefore we did not wait for him. We started on time because people are joining on YouTube. Therefore, I will request Dr. Trilochan Mahapatra, who was the Director General of ICAR, a seat which was once occupied by Dr. Swaminathan. He's also a rice scientist, and he was the director of the institute in Cuttack, where Dr. Swaminathan also spent some time. So he's the right person to speak on the legacy of Dr. Swaminathan and how we should take his vision forward to make India a food sufficient, a food surplus nation in times to come. Over to you, Dr. Mahapatra.
I'll go there.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Very good, very good afternoon to very good evening, rather, to all of you. Siraj Hussain Saab and other dignitaries, Dr. John Joseph and George John and Dr. Mr. Srivastava and others present in this hall. It's a pleasure to be here. In fact, few days before we lost Professor Swaminathan, and it's most befitting that we are today here, gathered here to remember him and pay tribute to him and explore ways how his legacy can be mainstream if or any aspect of it found appropriate as we go along for India's sustained food security in years to come. Thanks to Siraj Hussain Saab, so I have deep regards. Not only that, you led the Agriculture Department of Government of India. More importantly, a prolific writer. Through your powerful pen, you keep describing multiple facets of complexity of India's food and nutrition security, and providing dimensions unexplored, and in the process, providing and exploring new pathways for India to follow. So that is something which I deeply appreciate and regard. And thank you very much for leading and rather initiating this very discussion and giving me opportunity to be here. So I was surprised that, I mean, since you were, asking to come, so I readily agreed. On few occasions, I have been here listening to various lectures and interacting with experts, and every day almost such activities goes on. But this is a special day. Professor M.S. Swaminathan is not just an individual. He was an institution and also a phenomenon. Siraj Hussain Saab has given the background, and I will not deviate much from that, but around that particular theme, how he played a role and how we continue in the same direction, and what are the requirements today and tomorrow. Very briefly, because around 10 minutes time is available at my disposal. I believe that's the kind of time. Dr. Swaminathan, of course, being a student of genetics, so we always admire while listening to him on various occasions at the Indian Agriculture Research Institute. He taught and also headed the department or division of genetics. That was division of botany those days during his time. And when we studied as student of genetics and MSc and PhD at Indian Agriculture Research Institute, famously known as Birsa Institute. So he continued teaching there. And of course, headed the department, guided the department, and subsequently rose to the position of the Director General of Indian Council of Agriculture Research. So, as a scientist, first of all, as a student, he also studied there. He did his master's, those days associateship, so at IRI. So he studied there. So as a student there, and subsequently as a scientist, as a teacher, and then as an administrator, head of the department and the director of the Indian Agriculture Research Institute. So guiding from the front. So that is what is MS Swaminathan. Always, whether he was a student or teacher, researcher, or head or director, and subsequently Director General. Me getting associated with him because I was student of his student. So Professor V.L. Chopra, who also became Director General of Indian Council of Agriculture Research. So he was student of Professor M.S. Swaminathan. So I was a student of Professor V.L. Chopra during my PhD days. I learned the fundamentals of genetics, and those days biotechnology, which was established at Pusa Institute by Professor Chopra with support of Professor Swaminathan. Of course, he was those days at the International Rice Research Institute in 1985. And that is the kind of time when we joined as a student. Frequent interactions continued, but several personal interactions with him. And that gave us many things. And getting a glimpse of his total personality, and which is reflected in what he did for the country, and in fact to the global agriculture. And why even globally he is recognized, not just in India, as a stalwart in the arena of agriculture, rural development, and ecological principles and their applications in agriculture. Today we talk about, but those days he used to articulate so well at the global level. And he's, always appreciated for a phrase called economic ecology. I mean, which is today, everywhere we hear about ecological principles to be applied in agriculture. But he was praised for this particular aspect, which he so eminently, proposed, propounded, and also very strongly believed and pursued it even after coming back from International Rice Research Institute as a Director General. Few points which we learned during those days was the kind of discipline that he had in his life as an individual, as a researcher, as an administrator. Highly principled person. To a great extent unassuming, but he had definite plans to follow, never unplanned. And that is what one has to learn from him. And he was president of International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and he was having a meeting, and that was, I believe, in 1989 or so, 1990, in Pragati Maidan. King Gustav was there, the chief guest. So we organized that meeting. So we were, as volunteers, student volunteers were there and arranging things. And that was a very successful program. And subsequently, he wrote a letter to Professor Chopra. Professor Chopra was heading the Biotech Center those days. And Patnaik Sahab was associated with him subsequently, the Apada chair and all that. So he wrote to him that I am pleased to see that you have created a group that takes pride in perfection. So observing keenly that what was done and how it was done, and expressing that particular phrase. And one can dismiss it as a expression of English, but that is what he reflected in his life, taking pride in perfection. Whatever you do, it has to be done with perfection. That is what he did, and that is what he used to appreciate. And very briefly, again, there are several things when I was director of Rice Research Institute. In fact, it was M.S. Swaminathan. After he came back, after his PhD in Cambridge University, so he came back and he joined Central Rice Research Institute at Cuttack. And he was given the task of doing hybridization between two ecotypes, subspecies of indica rices, which we grow and eat. And that was, between indica and japonica. Oryza sativa, subspecies indica and japonica. Japonica, we don't really cultivate large scale. The objective was the productivity traits of japonica, which is largely grown in, say, Japan, to be combined with some of the tolerance traits of indica so that we have better performance. That was the thinking, and where he worked. He didn't stay long there because he was made for something else. He came to IRI, and then whatever he did, the rest is history. But he started there. When I was director, I invited him in my 3.5 years of my stay there. He came 3 times. And first time he was walking, second time he had a stick, and third time he was on wheelchair. So that is what happened during these 2012 to 2015-16. And slowly his health declined, and then we don't have now. And so much to learn. Few points why India succeeded in having self-sufficiency in food over a period of time, say more than a decade, of course. First, he recognized the power of science in agriculture. So the first lesson that we learned from what he visualized those days, it's not that during his PhD days and postdoc days, he learned from that, from the University of Wisconsin, where he did postdoctoral research, or University of Cambridge, where he did his doctoral research, and also a few other universities where he visited. So he did learn the value of science, that importance of science and relevance of science, and how effectively that science can be applied to agriculture to meet the challenges that India was facing that time, what was described by Siraj Hussain Saab. So what is that science that he actually identified to be of use in India? And it didn't happen that Borlaug introduced those, and he got Nobel Prize. He was recognized for that. And, it was the initiative of Professor Swaminathan. He only recognized the value of the semi-dwarf wheat. And he only wrote to Vogel, in fact, to provide those. But Vogel in USA, they had the ones which were not suitable for India. So it was, then he directed that you talk to Borlaug that he has done some breeding and he has some lines which might be suitable for India. So it was his thinking, his idea, his vision, which we have not been able to recognize. Because there are critics every time. And then critics always say something, obviously, and there are a group of people who believe in that. And probably the kind of recognition he deserved for this, initiating this. So this is the first thing, this time is not there, so another 2-3 minutes. So first point is the recognizing the potential of those semi-dwarfs, that they can contribute to enhancing productivity of wheat. And similar work which was doing at the Rice Research Institute, introducing semi-dwarfs in case of rice, and producing our own material which will be yielding much better, and same time quite adaptive to our situation. So that is one point of history that we always would remember for that particular decision. Of course, political support and decisions were in his favor due to various reasons. And that is what enabled India. So we brought seeds, tested them first of all, and then subsequently imported large quantity of seeds. Unheard in the history of any country that 18,000 quintal and seeds, and then getting those and distributing and all that. So that is history. But what is important is the science-led agriculture. And before that, it's not that we were not doing science. We're doing science, but it was not mainstreamed. So mainstreaming science, which is relevant, and then applying those at the field level. That's another aspect of his personality, that he himself used to go to the farmers' field. The farmers of Haryana, Punjab, they, even today, those who are surviving, of course, not many are there, but, the younger ones, they still remember his face and his work, and he's walking down their fields and then guiding them. So that is what is the kind of personality. So the first point is that if you had green revolution in this country, that is primarily because recognizing the potential of science and introducing that from outside with their support, and establishing that kind of cooperation and collaboration at the global level. And that is, again, a very, very important step. And that continues today. And that's the reason why we succeeded. So that's the first point I thought I should really mention. But then the second important point is that without institutions, without scientific personnel appropriate to the needs of the country, we can't move further. That is what he eminently recognized, elaborately planned, implemented actions at the ground level. And that's the reason why we continued his legacy this far. We have brought to this particular point. 2-3 examples I will cite to highlight this particular point. It's not easy. He became Director General in the year 1972, Director General of Indian Council of Agriculture Research. And at the same time, India also constituted, because these committees we keep constituting, and then Chief Justice, the earlier Chief Justice of India, Gajendra Gadkar Committee, and that was constituted to again see what is happening and then how to really restructure ICAR, and we continue doing that. And that recommended that it will not really continue the way it is continuing. ICAR should be reorganized, and the Director General should be a scientist, and there should be a kind of department called Agriculture Research and Education, which should see overall education and research in agriculture in the country. And also, at the same time, it recommended that you should have a service called Agriculture Research Service and establishment of Agriculture Scientist Recruitment Board. So that, and then an institution called National Academy of Agriculture Research Management. So institutionalizing the agriculture research. So prior to that, it was not there. It was totally fragmented, bringing institutions together under the umbrella of the Indian Council of Agriculture Research. That consolidation paid rich tributes subsequently as we went along. And we continue with that legacy. Even today, there's always a need to improve upon. There's a need to improve upon. That's the reason why we continue constituting committees. But Swaminathan, as a Director General of Indian Council of Agriculture Research, became the Secretary, Department of Agriculture Research and Education, Government of India, and subsequently established Agriculture Scientist Recruitment Board in 1973, Agriculture Research Service, National Academy of Agriculture Research Management in 1976, and the kind of institutionalization of agriculture research in a very systematic way happened, and the legacy continued. So, Green Revolution, as we see, as Siraj Hussain have said, there are negatives. And see the man, the prophetic man, in 1968, when Green Revolution was taking its roots in the soils of Punjab. That time, in Indian Science Congress at Banaras says that the way we are doing this agriculture, the way we are misusing fertilizer in the fields, the way we are withdrawing groundwater to irrigate crops, we are not far that the agriculture is going to face challenges and difficulties as we are facing today. And that was imagined when the Green Revolution was just happening, initiating, and he was actually talking about this in 1968 itself. So we blamed the Green Revolution, but he cautioned that how we should be careful in using irrigation water. Too much of underground water will lead to salinization. He cautioned even in 1968. Very terms and phrases are there. He also cautioned about the use of fertilizer and pesticide, the way we are using. So my point is that the kind of vision he had, the kind of prophecies he had that came true subsequently, and the negatives of that Green Revolution, he knew because of that. So we need to really learn few things from this, that science must be continued to be mainstreamed as we go along to face the challenges of climate change, the malnutrition, and so on and so forth. When I initiated the, strengthened the program on biofortification of crops, when I joined ICR as Director General in 2016, before that, there was only one biofortified crop. And I mainstreamed this and focused on this. And in 6 years of my stay, we developed more than 80 biofortified crop varieties, biofortified for zinc, for iron, to address malnutrition, vitamin A, and amino acids, and then, fatty acids, various kinds of requirements, and the negative factors were eliminated. Whole lot of things we addressed in that 6 years period. And I was discussing with him, and certainly it was new, and Honorable Prime Minister released twice these varieties. Mind you, Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji released twice these varieties, in the country, to just highlight the importance and mainstream them. And today we have more than 4 million hectares, which is in which biofortified crops are grown. It's a long way to go. There are several challenges and issues. I'll not go into that. I was discussing with Professor Swaminathan about it. He was very happy. And then what was his suggestion? He says, the way we adopted villages to have green revolution, please go to the village, adopt villages, demonstrate that production and consumption should be linked. If there is production, there is no consumption, there's no meaning. There has to be production. Identify villages where malnutrition is widespread. And he suggested some names. Some districts he suggested based on his own analysis as Rajya Sabha MP. And then we adopted some of those. Dr. Soumya was the Director General of ICMR those days. And we planned for, although it didn't take in a big way, due to various reasons, but that was his idea, how one can mainstream. So take data, understand what is the status of malnutrition, and then grow and feed in the school program, otherwise, PDS program, and then see how we are able to address malnutrition in this country, the hidden hunger in this country, the protein malnutrition in this country. And he talked about all this. So that is his kind of philosophy and the vision that he had and the way he was guiding the nation. And when he gave the call for evergreen revolution, and that was the background of that was the kind of observation he had, the negatives of green revolution he saw in Punjab and Haryana. So obviously, the ecological principles on which he based his argument for evergreen revolution, that we have not been able to really adopt and materialize as of today. We talk of organic agriculture, we talk of natural farming and so on and so forth. And globally, the talk is about regenerative agriculture, but a long way to go. A long way to go. So his legacy need to be really carried forward. He had many other ideas, and he worked on some of those. when he got this World Food Prize, equivalent of Nobel Prize, so in agriculture, of course. And so he used that money to establish MS Foundation in Chennai. I believe Dr. Soumya will be talking about that. So the fundamental principle there was, the vision was pro-poor, pro-woman, and pro-nature. That's the kind of philosophy he very strongly believed in. So I have taken all my time, and if there is, more time, I'll come back. Otherwise, I'll beg pardon. There are so many things to talk about. But when I went to his 98th birthday on 7th August 2023, I never knew that after 1 month, you will be no more. So I was standing along with Dr. Soumya, and both sides were standing, and then somebody said, Mahapatra has come. So he was able to understand who, because he was not really recognizing so much. And I said, sir, many things I said, but with a, high-pitched voice. And I said, sir, for all of us, you are God. Why you are God? Because for hungry, it is bread, which is God. And Mahatma Gandhi said, so I said, sir, you have only given this country, that kind of, food system that we take pride. And in the Committee of the Nations, we keep our head high because we have plenty to eat. And not only we are feeding 1.4 billion people and 80 crore people free food for more than a year, now up to 2028. We continue doing that. That's the declaration. And how it is possible? So it's because of science-driven agriculture. There are negatives, there are challenges. All these things will continue and will continue. And the legacy, the institutions, the expertise, the experience, the way it is to be done, the way it has been done by Professor Swaminathan, and that would continue. And I believe that would take us, forward to face the challenges which are there in future. And I'm sure, we would be able to live up to his expectation. And, he said, I am very happy, after listening to a few of those things which I said. So that is what is actually those last words. I was, again, I was there, 28th, he passed away, and, I was there on 30th on his last journey. And the same kind of aura you see on his face, even after he's gone. So that we always would remember him as a student, and I continue getting inspired. So thank you very much. And thanks for giving this me time. So many things to talk about, but anyway, I stop.
I'm frustrated.
Thank you, Dr. Mahapatra. As a successor of Dr. Swaminathan, we did want to listen to you. Thank you very much. Do we have Dr. Swaminathan on video?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here, Dr. Hussain.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Swaminathan, for joining. We look forward to your speech, especially the work which is being done to bring nutrition and agriculture and health on the same page. Over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Let us go that side. Let us.
Yeah.
We'll come.
Yeah. That's good.
Thank you very much. You're able to hear me all right?
You can sit here.
You can come this side.
Oh, that's okay.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you are audible.
Okay. No, good evening to you all, and thank you so much for having organized this event. And, thanks to Dr. Mahapatra, who gave a very extensive overview of my father's contributions to agriculture, which I think have been extensively written about also, and many of you are aware, many of you knew him very personally. He was very fond of the India International Center. It's his favorite place in Delhi, especially after we moved away. He moved away from Delhi in the early 1980s. After the Philippines, he came and settled in Chennai. But then when he was chairman of the Farmers Commission, for 6 years, actually, he occupied a suite at the India International Center. And he always remembered those days very fondly, how the people there took care of him, how he would have his breakfast, how everybody knew his favorite things to eat. And he did the entire Farmers Commission reports working out of the India International Center with a very small secretariat, but with many, many people helping him, of course. One thing he was very good at was bringing people together. And I think even on very contentious topics, he was able to find a way forward by taking everybody's views, listening to everyone, and then he would summarize it in a way that really nobody could find fault with what because it reflected everybody's inputs. But at the same time, he used to say that, sometimes you have to agree to disagree. You can't always have agreement, but it's good to have those debates and dialogues. And you should always reconsider your own views based on what others may be saying. So they may have a really good point and they may have evidence to back up that point. And so you should be continuously willing to reevaluate your beliefs and test them against new knowledge or new data or if you're challenged by someone. So that's, again, I think a very good trait for a scientist, not to be dogmatic, but to be always open to learning and humble enough to accept. And he was somebody who always supported good ideas, regardless of where those ideas were coming from. And he tried his best to help move those ideas along if he thought that they would be good for the Indian population. Even from when I was young, he encouraged me to do medicine because though I wanted to be in research, he felt that medical research, like agricultural research, needed a lot more actually strengthening, that a lot more could be done in India to do research on our own problems. And therefore, he was always very supportive of my decisions, and often said to me when I was in medical school and later that there was such a close link between nutrition and health that it was not well recognized. And in fact, he would often say about diseases like tuberculosis and leprosy that a drug-based alone is not sufficient, that a food-based approach was needed, not just for the patient, but also for the family of the leprosy patient or the TB patient who often also suffered from food insecurity because of the condition and the fact that most of these people were already poor. They were then stigmatized. They couldn't go to work and so on. And he recognized that long before others really spoke about the need for food and nutrition. Because when you think about an infectious disease like tuberculosis or leprosy, the medical establishment thinks about, in a biomedical way, about diagnosing and treating those infections. But today in 2023 now, a trial that I was also involved in when I was in the ICMR that was done in Jharkhand, recently published in the Lancet, actually showed by doing a proper randomized clinical trial that if you give food support to the families of TB patients, you can halve the incidence of new TB cases among those household contacts who are otherwise at very high risk of getting TB. So something that he knew instinctively, and spoke about 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, today has been proved by a randomized trial. And he did a lot for leprosy. He chaired a government committee, I think in the early 80s, on leprosy, where again he spoke about this holistic approach, not just drugs, but also food, social support, livelihood support, addressing stigma, and so on. And I remember he also chaired a committee on blindness. So I think his vision for people's well-being, I would say, was not just from the agriculture point of view, but really trying to see what, and because he understood, I think, the social circumstances and the determinants of health and nutrition that were much broader. He spoke about sanitation, he spoke about safe drinking water, and he always said that, just providing food and nutrition, though it's very important, will not result in a healthy child or a healthy individual if you don't also have a healthy environment, which means, a safe drinking water and safe sanitation facilities. He was always very sensitive to the plight of women, particularly women farmers, but women in general, because my mother, of course, also was a very strong champion for women. And together, I think they did a lot to address the gender dimensions of agriculture, which were really neglected. There was no mention of women or the problems of women in agriculture in any of the curricula and the agricultural universities. So that was developed and introduced for the first time when he was vice chair of the Planning Commission, the 6th Planning Commission. He introduced a chapter on gender in that commission report, and on environment. So for the first time, I think these two topics were addressed. And when he was a member of the Rajya Sabha, he introduced the Women Farmers Entitlement Empowerment Bill, which unfortunately did not make it through the Rajya Sabha had come to the end of its period. The elections happened in 2014, and then because the bill was introduced in the Rajya Sabha and not in the Lok Sabha, it did not automatically carry on to the next parliament. But I think, there was a wonderful opportunity there really to bring a law really to look at specifically at women farmers issues. Through the foundation that he set up, the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, he addressed many of these issues. And as Dr. Mahapatra said, the whole philosophy of the foundation was to use science, technology, but combine it with the traditional knowledge of people, particularly of indigenous people, tribal people. And he always said that they are not beneficiaries. He didn't like the word beneficiaries that we use so often, particularly in government programs, but he always saw them as co-participants in whether it was research or whether it was designing a new policy or strategy. He liked to think of them as equal partners in that endeavor. So I think that is a very unique trait that he had, which made him successful, is that he treated everybody with respect. Doesn't matter who you were. He treated prime ministers and farmers with the same respect. He actually listened to everyone, incorporated their views, and that's how I think the policies that he was involved in developing were very sensitive, to the needs of the stakeholders that they were meant to. Unlike sometimes policies that are developed without all of that stakeholder input or without really having that feedback, which sometimes then, you have to revise later because they're not suited for our own conditions. So there are many aspects of his personality, I think, beyond his being an outstanding scientist, that actually makes him stand out. And I think that's the legacy that he leaves, really, I think, is, yes, we have to use science, we have to depend on science, we have to support science and scientists, but we also need to do it in a way that's participatory, in a way that addresses equity, and in a way that is sustainable, both economic sustainability and ecological sustainability. And finally, he always was very, very inspired by the concept of the gross national happiness that Bhutan uses instead of the GDP. And he spoke often about that. He quoted Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore a lot. He wrote a book along with Dr. Ikeda, who's the leader of the International Soka Gakkai movement, on peace and spirituality and the Evergreen Revolution. And he was chairman of the Pugwash Conference for Peace and Development, which is usually chaired by well, it's been chaired by many very top scientists. But when he chaired the Pugwash conference, at that time, HIV was raging in the world. There had been no treatment at that time developed for HIV. This was in the 90s. And so he spoke about how HIV could actually be a threat to peace and security, and again, how food and nutrition were an important part of addressing. And today we see that conflicts around the world, which are leading to food insecurity in many, many countries, and people are becoming migrants, climate migrants, because they don't have food. They can no longer grow food, and they can no longer import food because of conflicts. So I think he was, in that sense, somebody who had the ability to see well ahead into the future and to tell us all how to prepare for it. So definitely at the foundation, it's a very hard act or a very big legacy actually that he has left, that we can walk in his footsteps. But I think that's what really is needed today. I think all of the messages that Dr. Mahapatra also mentioned is something that hopefully will continue to inspire us all for a long time. Thank you very much, Mr. Siraj Hussain, and everyone else for having organized this and also having invited me to say a few words. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Swaminathan, for your very kind words. We have watched you from WHO Geneva during the COVID pandemic, and we all relate to what you did there and how you brought more credibility to WHO, which was under a lot of discussion and debate at that time. The next speaker is Dr. George John. You know, many of us are not aware of the success story of Indian agriculture and allied sectors. We know much about crops because crops get a lot of coverage, but we do not know much about what is happening in other sectors. And one reason for this, and I've written about it, I'm sorry that I'm mentioning this. One reason of this is that the policymakers in Delhi and many other North Indian states are staunch vegetarians. And therefore, the success stories of poultry, fisheries, etc. are not discussed. And from time to time, in Delhi and NCR, you have bans on sale of fish, sale of poultry, sale of meat, this, that, and the other. So our next speaker is a fisheries scientist, also, which is also a part of the ICAR system established by Dr. Swaminathan. I do not know if this institute was also established.
Which institute?
Fisheries, Central Fisheries Research Institute by Dr. Swaminathan?
No, before that.
Before that. So maybe you can say something about the progress we have made in fisheries. I can only say as a consumer of fisheries that we have made very good progress, and this beautiful source of protein is available at a very cheap rate. Some 120 to 130 rupees a kilogram, travels all the way from Andhra Pradesh and is sold even in Northeast. So over to you, Dr. John. Dr. George John retired as the Vice Chancellor of Birsa Agricultural University. He has spent long years in fisheries sector, and I am sure that he will bring some new dimensions to the contribution of Dr. Swaminathan to the allied sectors of Indian agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sirajuddin, Dr. Mahapatra, and Srivastava Sab. I would say it's my privilege to be here to share some snippets on the scientific aspects of Dr. Swaminathan and quite a lot of personal details about him, which I know. I had the privilege of joining the Agriculture Research Service, which he created in 1976. I joined in 1978. And subsequently, I still remember he visited my lab in Orissa. That was in 1981. And I wrote to him and he wrote back congratulating me for the work. Since then, it's been a kind of a non-stop interaction. And I moved from ICR to the Department of Biotechnology, which again, he was the reason for its creation. I'll come to that in a little while. I was also in the CG system for quite some time. Again, his presence was always there. I was working in the fisheries sector, but he was always there also. So let's come back to some of the details. I would like to take the line from what Mr. Siraj had written. Most readers of this article may not have stood at a fair price shop. Well, I was one of them who stood at these fair price shops. I still remember the name of the outlet, TUCS, Trilochan Urban Cooperative Society outlet. I used to come back from my school, take the bag and rush to the place so that I had to reach before it closed. And I still remember we used to get about 5 kilos or 6 kilos of wheat, and that was quite a good thing for a large family. So I recall that with a kind of nostalgia. You'll ask me why it's a kind of nostalgia, because it's a reminder of from where we started and where we are today. And that gives us sense of satisfaction, the distance that we have traveled. Now, most of us have read that India was a ship-to-mouth situation. Mission impossible, as Paul Ehrlich and others had said, India would not survive, India would be dead. Probably the only way for them is to, probably in that same tone, relieved of their lives. I think that must have been the phrase in the same context it's been used. But things changed. Dr. Borlaug, Dr. Swaminathan, we all know that part of the story. And I would say that we, in terms of the Green Revolution, we probably did things maybe a little faster than anticipated without adequate safeguards. And I've seen this happening in the aquaculture sector also, the intensive farming. In those days when Dr. Swaminathan was there in the ICR, we had the KVKs and the operational research projects. These were all created by him. The operational research projects, especially in fisheries, demonstrated high production levels, which were not heard of. And when I was in the Department of Biotechnology, we launched a mission mode program. That was when we broke all barriers. We were able to produce prawn on par with the others. But what happened? That should have been the green revolution of aquaculture, but it kind of became a greed revolution with fly-by-night operators getting into prawn farming and doing all sorts of things. That led to ecological problems. And I still remember many meetings held at the Swaminathan Research Foundation, looking at the ecological aspects. Despite all those precautions, we had problems. It went to the Supreme Court, and you know the entire thing. But things have stabilized, and today we are one of the largest producers of fish. And the same thing happens with poultry. The same thing happens with the dairy industry. So all these things, the spillover effect of Dr. Swaminathan's influence has been there, and I've seen it. I've discussed this with many times with him with regard to the aquaculture. Coming to the institutions that he has created, DBT, yes, it was the National Biotechnology Board. He chaired that, which later on got converted into the Department of Biotechnology. He was instrumental in creating the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, the ICRISAT. I'm not naming the other institutions. And his presence was very much there in the CG system. I was working for the World Fish Center. I was in Cairo for 5 years, and he was leading the Fish for All campaign of the World Fish. Now, you wouldn't know this, Fish for All campaign for the entire world fish across the globe he was leading. And his association with DBT, he had been in the Department of Biotechnology task forces, a number of task forces. He was responsible for creating plant varieties, protection of plant varieties and farmers' rights. Also, he was associated with the CG system in very many ways. One more aspect that I'd like, FAO Council, IUCN. Well, these are all contributions that have been there. And it is his constant influence at the international level. I would say that his global outreach is unparalleled. We would like to see him as a man of agriculture, like mainstream agriculture. We are not in the mainstream. Dr. Ayyappan used to say, Dr. Ayyappan is also a fisheries scientist. We are from the same batch. He would say, we are lucky. Though we are not in the mainstream agriculture, we have been able to interact with him so closely and for so many years. there are so many aspects of it which have not been touched. Dr. Soumya mentioned Pugwash. He was president of the Pugwash. I was in Cairo. I remember I did suggest a name to him, somebody who was working for Arab-Israeli unity in Palestine. I suggested his name for being recommended for the Nobel Prize. He took it up. And, well, he didn't get it, but I'm saying that was the thing. He would take any suggestion. He would be willing to look at it with an open mind. As a person, I would say, Dr. Soumya mentioned, he treats everybody with equal respect. On a one-to-one basis, he engages even with the smallest functionary in an institute. Sometimes it's a little awkward for the seniors, when he cuts protocol and goes down to the juniors or goes to the student and says hello to him, Well, our system is still a bit stratified, but he wouldn't care about that. The first letter I got from him was in 91, and since then I must have about 15 or 20 letters. I've very carefully preserved all of them. So what they would say, you write to Dr. Swaminathan, you are sure to get a reply. It may not be tomorrow, day after, but you will certainly get a reply from him, irrespective of whatever his position. And I have tested and I found it to be true. Now it's too late for anybody else to test. Green revolution, evergreen revolution. We need to move into a system-based approach. He was very sensitive about the gender issues, the role of women, to give them the rightful place. He would always consider those issues. Women in agriculture is something. Women's biotech park he set up in Chennai. He was very fond of that, and many programs were there where women entrepreneurs were setting up their shops, looking at technologies and trying to translate and make them commercial. Women's biotech park, this is something that you should consider. Of course, there have been problems with green revolution. I think there is a problem with any technological advance, any medicine that you take. If you read the instructions, I don't think you would take it, because that's the kind of caution that is there with everything. Even a simple Brufen or anything, you have 1.5 pages of possible dangers, So that goes, and it's not a problem with green revolution. It's the problem with the way people managed it. Very much the same as with aquaculture, all different people getting into trying to make quick money. So we have to sort of take a balanced view and take things forward. I'm not going into the number of awards that he has got. It's a list. I've made a list of all these things. I have a huge folder on this. He got a PhD in 1952. I'm happy I was born in the same year. 85 PhDs he guided, and 85 PhD honorary doctorates he got. When I was the Vice Chancellor, he honored our university by accepting an honorary DSc from us. I mean, I personally cherish that, That was the man, And he would, last time I met him, it was last year, and he said, John, I know you meet me every time you come to Chennai. Thank you. I was planning to meet him this December. Unfortunately, Dr. Mahapatra, you have been lucky. You were able to meet him. So that is the kind of person that he was, We do not factor in all his contributions because most of it is not available to many. Now, if you look at the Global Seed Bank, Norwegian Global Seed Bank, that was again based on his push. I still remember attending a lecture by somebody in Jeffrey Sachs in his foundation. And Jeffrey Sachs was saying that if Africa had listened to him 20 years ago, they would not be in this state. That's what he said, Jeffrey Sachs. I attended that lecture. So this is the kind of situation that we are in. Food access to all, hidden hunger. I know some of these issues Dr. Soumya mentioned, tuberculosis and malnourishment. I knew a doctor in Jharkhand. He was coming to our university. He wanted some farming techniques to teach the tribals. He said, they are all coming to me for TB. They are TB infected, but they should have more food and not medicine. So he was coming to our university and trying to so he said, I'm a doctor trying to teach the tribals to go back to some of their traditional farming system. So the message is very, very clear that unless you look at the entire system in a holistic manner, and the evergreen revolution will and should incorporate an ecosystem approach. I don't think, I'm sure Dr. Mahapatra, these are things that are on your mind. I do not know how we can institutionalize and internalize some of these concepts, a little more. Probably periodical discussions should be taking place. So this is in very brief, my recollections of a man who I always say I admire him, my deep and abiding admiration for him. Can I, as a member of IIC, suggest that we should set up a Swaminathan Study Center as an online facility where all the records and other things are available online, so that it becomes a discussion point and for furthering, and as we say, the legacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. George John, for a very personal tribute to Dr. Swaminathan. There are so many things to be said. I think we still have about 10 minutes, so we can take 2-3 comments. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself and be brief.
Want to thank everybody. Very good, recollections of a very great man, scientist. The question posed by the chair in the beginning, the much maligned or criticized Green Revolution, I would have liked to listen a little more to to the criticism per se. You see, it's certainly not to do with Dr. Swaminathan. There's no question about that. As a general rule, individuals can't be responsible for all failings of things. So that's not the issue at all. The fact is that the Evergreen Revolution it's only a concept, only a term. So where have the gaps been would in itself be a great tribute to Dr. Swaminathan if we don't skirt that question. I know this is not the occasion. I'm not saying that because we are remembering him and we cannot, but I would hope that the experts can enlighten us on where policy failed or institutions failed or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Ajay Dua, used to be with the government. I recall that in the year 1968, I don't know how many of you, I was in my master's class at the Delhi School of Economics and adopted for agricultural economics as a subject, being taught at the Agroeconomic Research Center. In 66, 67, some 4 or 5 agroeconomic research centers had been set up in various parts of the country. And the one in Delhi, at Delhi School of Economics, was chaired by Professor Amartya Sen, and one Dr. Lakshminarayan used to be the deputy director. A subject for discussion, all of us had to produce one paper in the course of the year, and the subject which was given to me, or I chose, I don't know, was, would these high-yielding varieties be a panacea for India's food problem? And cyclostyle you wrote it, distributed, went to the staff or others, and suddenly I found the day I was to present, Dr. Swaminathan was going to moderate it. He happened to be probably at the ICAR, and Dr. Amartya Sen must have called him up, colleagues, etc. So he turned up there. And my approach, a little leftist at that point of time, to the School of Economics, had a tradition. So I had said, very good seed, etc. Dharma Roja used to be called, Dr. Borlaug's name I had heard for the first time at that time, was saying that it is not going to be solving the problem because it requires too much water and it requires inputs, other inputs as well, whether it was seeds because they are scarce to come by. At that point of time, the high-yielding seed, it will require more insecticides, pesticides, and the income which used to come from selling your stock, after you had threshed the wheat. This is much less here because these were the dwarf varieties. I remember after hearing all this, and he had obviously seen the paper while coming to the Delhi School of Economics. He said, and I think this was the first time the word Green Revolution was raised, because Amartya Sen then discussed that subject in our presence with him. He said, "You are talking, Dr. Swaminathan, of a green revolution in the country. But isn't there something in this, what my student is saying, that it is not going to, it is limited to wheat as of now, and it will go only to the rich farmers. And it is not going to be adopted so easily unless there is a massive support program coming in for agriculture, whether it's water, fertilizer, and other kind of things, that it may or may not sort it out." But his optimism, that's what I want to recall, was there in 1968, which is now 32 years plus 23, 55 years ago. And I heard it in as many words from him, and great tribute to him that over the years, the decades that he was heading the global scenario as well as Indian, he did see that India does extremely does well, and that's what I would like to recall.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dua. So before I request Director IAC, Mr. Srivastav, to say concluding remarks, one more comment we have. Yes, sir.
I just want to mention that I just got a call from Mr. Sompal. He had reached Dholakua, but his wife was taken seriously ill, so he had to turn back. So he's given his apologies. He just called up. So I said we must put that to all of you. The other thing I just wanted to mention, the simplicity of the man. It was 2011, and I called up Dr. Swaminathan. He was in Chennai, and we were planning that we have this the Borkar Memorial Lecture here at the IIC, and this was my dad's centenary. So he immediately agreed, and he just on a call, and he came, and then there he, in fact, at the lecture, the full house, and he got a standing ovation. The simplicity of the man, which I want to put on record. To reach such universal acclaim and then can maintain simplicity, that's a very big thing. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. Just the last word.
Yeah. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om. So it was about the appeasement with the departed soul, a soul which has transcended beyond imagination, done almost everything on his mortal self, and left us with nothing except for rethinking and reinventing. So George told a very good thing is that whosoever sent him an email, he will respond to him sooner or later. I'm a very small person compared to him, but it's very, very important to share a very personal experience with Professor Swaminathan. In the year 2000, around 2000, I got an invitation from Open School. I don't know from where they got my name, to give some article to their magazine. So I thought of what to do. Then it was about the education system was changing. So from Open School, from Panchtantra to Khuli Pathshala, that was the topic that I thought of and shared it. And there was a quotation from Professor Swaminathan, which I cited there, which I have shared with you. I will not repeat here because that will take lots of time. But what happened when I shared that copy of that article with him, so he, such a humble personality, he said, "Why don't you include me in your mailing list?" And from that day onwards, till just 1 or 2 months prior to his completion, we have been exchanging through emails and on all sort of things. Second, a tribute to India International Center, because you are Now, remembering a personality which had got the international reach and depth, much of which in research side, my friend Mahapatra ji has already told how he could reach the right person to get the right material out of his knowledge in science, his depth in science, and his knowledge in the area where it was happening. And I am telling because what Soumya told about equity side. So it was as independent chair of the FAO Council in 1983 that he came up with an international undertaking on plant genetic resources. That was the first non-legally binding arrangement at the international level, which Swaminathan had started at the UN body level at FAO. And the text of that was also prepared by him, just like the text of his our Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act was prepared at the Madras Keystone 1994, as many of you may be knowing. So he's bent about, if you have to deal with the farmers' rights here in India, you have to see what is happening globally. And somewhere at the global level, you have to trigger all these things. And he started there. These are 2 points I just want.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I came here to listen to all the interviews. And Dr. Chopra also was there at that time. But I'm glad, I came here today.
Thank you. Thank you. So over to you, Mr. Srivastava, for concluding remarks.
Friends, we have gathered here to pay our tribute to great son of India, Dr. Swaminathan, and to recall his legacy and celebrate that. I'm very happy that Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the worthy daughter of MSS, has been able to join us, though not physically, but virtually. Actually, we had made a request to her to come to Delhi and join us physically, but because of some other commitments, she could not. I'm very thankful to her for sparing her time and joining us. I would like to inform all of you, Dr. Soumya has kindly agreed to deliver the next C.D. Desuk Memorial Lecture at IISc, which will be taking place on the 14th of January. So she will be physically present here, and I request all of you to join that that program. Friends, Dr. Mahapatra very nicely recalled Mahatma Gandhi's word that for a hungry man, food is the God. In that sense, Dr. MSS is a God to us because he really gave us food. I remember my, school days. I come from a very backward village. Now, of course, it's developed in Eastern UP Eastern UP, district called Ghazipur. 1965, drought, which hit the country very badly. I have experienced that period. Though Ganga River was flowing next by, the water table was very high, but still the whole region was suffering with acute drought. We were waiting from morning till evening for the goods train carrying food grains to come from Punjab to bring us some food so that the population can survive. I cannot forget those days. Immediately thereafter, this Green Revolution started. Again, I recall that period very clearly. Government of UP and so also the state government came up with a loan scheme called Takavi loan. It was just 500 rupees loan which was being given out to the farmers, whoever was having a well, to buy a IP set and start irrigation. And then this, as a part of Green Revolution, the fertilizer came, the seeds came, the Taichung, what we were mentioning, also came. And within 3 years' time, I find in my own village, we started going 3 crops. So these are some, experiences which always, keep, coming to my mind. Friends, it is because of MSS and his group of, scientists that the food grain production, what used to be just 50 million tons in 1950-51, has today is 330 million tons. That is more than 6 times. Our population that time was 36 crores, which has now become 140. You can say it has increased by 4 times, but food kit production has increased by 6 times. And as Dr. John was mentioning, that besides the food grains, in the agriculture allied sector also have done tremendous progress in fisheries, in poultry, and also in fruits productions, etc. And that milk, yes, milk, yes, yes. So because of all these, today we are sitting comfortable, though our population increased, but we are able to feed everybody. We are able to export. We are able to take care of food grain requirements of other countries. For all these things, we definitely pay our very, very rich tribute to Mr. Swaminathan, and the country will ever be grateful. It is very unfortunate that a man who has made so much of monumental contribution to the country has not been considered so far for Bharat Ratna.
Yes.
And it is never too late. I would like to request the government that it is not too late, it can still be considered. Friends, Dr. Swaminathan also reminded us about the close association of MSS with IIC and how much he was affectionate to IIC, how much he was attached. I would like to tell Dr. Soumya that we at IIC are equally, attached to him. We always remember him. And that is why, we thought of to have this kind of, program to remember him and pay our, rich tribute to him. Friends, there are certain things which Dr. John also mentioned, so also Dr. Mahapatra. MSS, the biggest contribution of his was to mainstream science in the agriculture. And he had also forewarned us about certain dangers, etc. The problem with us is that we have been just going on a single track. We do not make any course correction. We do not listen to the sane advices. That is why we end up ourselves to problem. For example, in the matter of food production also, whenever any dam is constructed, whenever any command area is developed, always a cropping pattern is prescribed. But I myself implemented major irrigation projects in Karnataka state too, which was my cadre. And I find that invariably the farmers violate those things. And no one from the political side, the political executive side, ever, reprimands farmers or tells anything to them. Now, if we follow this kind of a tendency, we are definitely going to bring only misery to ourselves. If anybody is committing, mistake, is committing something which is not in the interest of the nation, he has to be warned, he has to be reprimanded, he has to be, acted upon. Until this courage of conviction comes to our political executive, things are only going to worsen. So let us, the biggest tribute for us would be to MSS from our side would be to tell all those people, and whenever we meet, that let us follow his principles. Let us also conform to discipline that he has taught to us, and let us, celebrate his legacy and remember him for, for the contribution that he has made to the country. Friends, before I end, I would like to also compliment Dr. Siraj Hussain for, conducting this program, and to Dr. Trilochan Mahapatra and George John, for sparing their time and reminiscing their association with MSS. I am very happy that Madam, sorry Madam, I couldn't get your name, who has done her PhD under MSS. She is here. Okay, Madam. So I'm very, very fortunate to have you here today. So with these few words, I'd like to thank all of you for your presence here, and let us uphold the legacy and principles of MSS always. Thank you very much.
You don't lose anything. It's an online resource.
So, definitely.